Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials. Let me read that again. Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials. And I want us to put a little pause in between it and all. Instead of just saying, consider it all joy, I want us to say, consider it all joy. Consider it all joy. Well, let's start off with what is a trial. Can you turn this down a little bit? I don't know if it's up here or out there. Let's start off with the word. What is with the word trial? What is a trial? A trial is going through a time of difficulties. A trial is going through a time of afflictions, going through a time of painful circumstances. In other words, you're going through some bad things and they're lasting for a while. And this verse tells us that these trials will come our way, because I see the words when you encounter and not if you encounter. So we can conclude that trials are a part of the Christian life. There's no way around it. Trials are inevitable. Also, y'all, I see the words various trials. So we can conclude that multiple and diverse types of trials are part of the Christian life. Yet the verse says, consider it all joy. New Living Translation says, consider it an opportunity for great joy. And I'm going to have to inform you that the verb used here, this consider, it's an imperative verb. It's a verb that says this is a command. It commands us, the Bible commands us to consider it all joy. This is not advice. This is not a suggestion. This is an order for every Christian. We must make full attempt to follow this, to consider our trials as all joy. In other words, when you've already been through 8 trials, and you're on trial number 9, and it's something you've never faced before, you are commanded to consider it all joy. But God understands that trials are not naturally joyous. So the command is not to feel all joy, but to consider it all joy. When you consider, you think. Consider means you're engaging in an intellectual process and not an emotional one. Consider means simply you're using your brain instead of letting your emotions cause you to spin out of control. So this verse is teaching us, this verse is commanding us to think it through. And after thinking it through, you can come to the conclusion that you can have a joyful attitude about the trial that you're going through. Of course, the question is, how can I consider everything that's going on, the bad things in my life, how can I consider it all joy? How can there be joy in my trial? Well, verse 3 says this, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. The trial that you're going through is a test of your faith. Even though the trial may take the form of a money problem or a health problem or a relationship problem or persecution problem or somebody lied on me problem, in the end, it is a test of your faith. Even if you brought the trial on yourself by bad decisions, or you brought the trial on yourself by wrong actions, it's still a test of your faith. The test is, will you trust and have faith in God while dealing with the repercussions of your actions? Your trial is a test of your faith. We can say it this way. Your trial puts your faith on trial. And what will the verdict be? I say your trial is putting your faith on trial. And what will the verdict be? Will it be proven that you have the faith that God knows and God cares? After the trial is through, would it be proven that you have the faith and you know that God knows what is best? Will it be proven that you have the faith that God's plans can be trusted? Will you have the faith that God is reliable? That God can do anything? Will you have the faith to accept what God allows? Will you have the faith to do things God's way when you don't understand why? This trial, your trial, is a testing of your faith. Think about what you're going through. It's a testing of your faith. I said, think about what you're going through. It's been going on for a while because it's a trial. It is a testing of your faith. And this verse commands us to consider it all joy. Because this testing of your faith will produce what? It will produce endurance. Other versions, you see the words, because the Greek word means endurance. It means steadfastness. It means patience. It means perseverance. And I get it. These are not words that excite us. If I say, I'm going to have a Bible study on patience, oh boy. We're going to have a teaching on steadfastness. I don't know about that. But what do all of these words have in common? Endurance, steadfastness, patience, perseverance. These are things that allow you to finish the race. These are things that allow you to reach the goal. These are things that allow you to claim the prize. In case you didn't know, or maybe you forgot, the Christian race is not a sprint. It's a long-distance race. It is a marathon. And in a marathon, in an endurance race, you've got to have endurance. And though the thought of endurance is not exciting to most of us, it'll help you finish the race. Endurance will get you where you want to go. Just like buying gas for your car, it is not exciting, but it will get you where you want to go. And that's why when they jacked up the prices of gasoline, we endured. Because we understood this gas in my car will get me where I need to go. The trial that you are going through is building up your endurance, building up your steadfastness, building up your perseverance so that you can get to where you need to go. And there is no other way to get this endurance but through a trial that will test your faith. You don't just wake up with endurance. You've got to go through something. Many of the people that we admire their strength, we admire their wisdom, their fortitude, their patience. They have that because they went through a trial. They went through trials. They went through various trials. They went through something. A weightlifting champion has to lift weights over a long period of time. So the Bible commands us to consider this. Think about it. Understand that there is a reason to consider it all joy. Again, I don't like to pay for gas, but it sure feels good when I have a full tank. Because I know I can get to where I need to go. Verse 4 says, and let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Building endurance has an effect on you. Being steadfast does something in you. Perseverance brings out something in you. It makes you perfect and complete. Now, this type of perfect doesn't mean that you don't have any faults. It means that you are prepared. It means you are ready. It means that you are fully mature. Your trials build endurance, and the endurance will have you ready. The trials build endurance, and the endurance will have you prepared. The trials will build endurance in you, and the endurance will have you mature and complete. God uses endurance to get you ready, to get you prepared, to train you, to mature you, to complete you. Now, I'm going to be real particular with my words right here, so I'm going to say it, and then please allow me to explain it. God calls unqualified people, but God does not use unqualified people. God calls unqualified people, but God does not use unqualified people. When I say unqualified, I'm not talking about worthiness, for none of us are worthy. I'm talking about actual qualifications, skills, and experience. I mean, we see it in the job world every day. Employers seek qualified people. That's why they look at your skills, they look at your employment history, your training, your experience, your certifications, your education, your references. Well, guess what? God employs people for jobs and positions that affect all of eternity, and he does not fill those important jobs with unqualified people. I'll give you an example, I'm just using Malachi as an example. Malachi, wave your hand, Malachi, so people know who you are. God might, I'm just using them as an example, but God might have called Malachi to be the next pastor or world missionary. But I can guarantee you it won't be tomorrow because he's not qualified. He would have to go through some things. But glory to God, even though God does not use unqualified people, he calls unqualified people. Your resume will be sorely lacking, but God will still reach out to you. But when he reaches out to you, he doesn't give you the job. He puts you in training. And his training program is full of trials because he has to build up your endurance. And that endurance, in turn, will mature and complete you and train you and get you ready. It'll qualify you. And when you reach the level of qualification that God requires, then you can begin the position that he has for you. David was called to be king when he was an unqualified youngster. But he did not get the job right away. He had to go through about 15 years of trials. He almost died 4 or 5 times, but he endured. He learned, he matured, until he got to the point that God says, now it's time to become king. Last week we talked about Joseph, did we not? Joseph was called by God to run a government when he was an unqualified and spoiled 17-year-old boy. But he did not get the job until he was almost 40. Joseph had to go through a 22-year training period, a training program that included being a slave, that included being put in prison. But guess what? Joseph endured. And that endurance prepared him to rule Egypt and save the lives of many people. Moses was called by God. He was called by God when he was just a baby. And he tried to clock into his job when he was 40 years old, but he wasn't ready yet. Ended up running for his life because he was not qualified. He was called, but he was not qualified. But then after 40 more years of training, leading his father-in-law's sheep in the desert, God said, now your training is complete. And God called him on the mountain from a burning bush. And God gave him the job at 80 years old. So now you've been leading your father-in-law's sheep. Now you can lead my sheep, my people, Israel, through the wilderness. And that's when Moses went to Pharaoh and said, God said, let my people go. Jesus called 12 unqualified men to be his apostles. But they had to enter a 3-year program that included the trials of being homeless, living meal to meal, and dodging the authorities before they finally got the job on the day of Pentecost. I like the story in Acts. It talks about how one time Peter and John were speaking before the Pharisees, and they spoke so well. They were like, now none of these guys been to any of our schools, but they're so bold and they're speaking so well. Then they remembered they were with Jesus. Jesus qualified him. He was fishing at first, but God qualified him to be an apostle. So whatever trials you are going through, before you let the emotions of despair and complaining take over, stop and think. Consider what is really happening and count it all joy. Stop and think, that's right, I'm being trained. Let me calm down, I'm being prepared. Let me not lose control, I'm being matured, I'm being trained for what God has for me. Consider it all joy. Allow the trials that God is allowing you to go through have their effect on you. Yield to the preparation. Yield to the training. Yield to the lessons. Yield to the strengthening. Yield to the maturity that God is doing in you. And then even after you have the job, most jobs have some type of continuing education and training. Most jobs you got to go back and refine what you already know. Update your skill set because times are changing. Update your knowledge because times are changing. Some of you, you've got the job, but you're being recertified. And you're going through something, you say, I've been through this before. Why am I going through it again? You got to be retrained. You got to be recertified. Because God does not use unqualified folks. It's too important. But Pastor, that sounds real hard. You don't have an argument for me. I'm with you. But I believe that's why the Apostle Paul said one time in Philippians, I've learned in whatsoever state I am to be content. He said, I learned that. It wasn't something that I just had. I had to learn to be content in no matter what state I am in. We've got to learn to consider it all joy. This will sound familiar. When going through a trial, let me say it this way, you must remember that all things work together for your good. So therefore, I can consider this thing that I'm going through as joy. Once again, your faith comes into play. Your mood about your trial says a lot about your faith. Your attitude about your trial says a lot about your faith. The things you are saying about your trial while you're going through that trial says a lot about your faith. We've got to let faith and our spiritual intelligence dictate how we feel instead of letting our fleshly emotions tell us how to feel and respond. Mr. Christian, Miss Christian, you have received your orders. This is an order. This is an order for Christians. Consider it all joy. Consider it all joy. Let me offer this encouragement for you. Of course, you don't have to consider it all joy. You can choose sadness. You can choose complaining. You can choose distress. You can choose anger at God. You can choose hopelessness. You can choose, I'm not going to let endurance work on me. But trials are inevitable. Most of us have some type of either a written prayer list or a mental prayer list. You can get every prayer on your list answered today, and more trials will come. So since they will come, if you don't learn to consider it all joy, that means depending on your age, you've got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, maybe some of younger people, 90 years of sadness, complaining, distress, anger at God, and hopelessness coming your way. Because the trials are going to come. I mean, you can win the lottery and be a millionaire tomorrow. Guess what? Trials still going to come. I just read a story about a lady who won the lottery. She was a waitress. A man, instead of giving her a tip, gave her a lottery ticket, and she hit big. Next thing you know, the rest of her co-workers sued her. The guy who gave her the ticket sued her. Her husband divorced her and sued her. Trials will come. So you've got to learn to consider it all joy. God, you allow me to go through it, so you are doing something in me. Preparing me for something that you want me to do for others. So you know what? I'm going to just consider this all joy. I know you have a purpose. I know you have a plan. And maybe I can't see it, but again, it's a test of my faith. I have faith, God, that you know what you are doing. So I'm going to count it. I'm going to consider it all joy. Don't let your trials dictate your joy. Have faith. And then, y'all, we are not left without an example. Hebrews 12:2 says this. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy, there's the word joy, awaiting him, he endured, there's the word endured, he endured the cross, disregarding his shame. Now he is seated in place of honor beside God's throne. It says we do this. What do we do? Well, the previous verse says that we run with endurance the race that is set before us. You got to run the race, and it's going to take endurance. How can we do that when you feel like, oh, man, I want to consider all joy? Look to Jesus. Look to him as an example. Now, he did not need training. He was the only one who was fully qualified when called, but he did set an example for us. He went through the ultimate trial. He went through the ultimate suffering on the cross. And Jesus focused on the joy. He counted it as joy, in other words, awaiting him. In other words, he considered the joy awaiting him on the other side of the grave. He's thinking of, this, I'm going to count this as joy, this rising from the dead. What I'm going to do is going to make salvation available to all. What I'm going to do is going to bring victory over sin and death. And that allowed him to endure the cross and disregard the shame. And guess what? He got the job with the highest honor. Sitting at the right hand of God. And he's King of kings and Lord of lords. And at his name, every knee shall bow and confess. But he had to endure. He had to endure. And how was he able to endure? He counted it as joy. Let's pray.